Hello, everybody, and welcome back to yet another very exciting episode of the Friends Talking Fantasy podcast. My name is Charles, and with me today, as always, is my lifelong friend and co-host, Dylan.
I'm ready to talk some fantasy with my friends, Charles.
Yes, because today we have the honor and the privilege to welcome back frequent guest and collaborator Christian Cameron, aka Miles Cameron. Christian, thank you so much for coming back on the show.
Hey, I'm here to talk with my friends, as I think we've now done this often enough that we're friends.
I would
Even though I
wholeheartedly
stood you
agree.
up, even though I stood you up 2 weeks ago, but we won't talk about that.
You're a busy man, you're entertaining, you're having parties, and we totally understand. It gave us more time to dive into the world of artifact space, which is why we're here today. This is not the first time we've talked about artifact space is the first book. We're here to talk about the Arcana Imperii, your second book, Deep Black, which came out back in August, right? Was when it released. So a
Yep.
relatively recent release. Congratulations on that. And yeah, we were just reminiscing about when we were talking about the first book in your sci-fi series, Artifact Space, and how much fun we had with that. It feels like forever ago now. And we were talking about how during the recording, all the COVID restrictions had just been lifted when we were having this conversation. So it's a long time in the making, a lot of history, a lot of friendship building all along the way. So we're super happy to now focus in on Deep Black, book two of the series.
I just want to say, I planned the book launch to be at Glasgow at Worldcon.
Mhm.
I sort of like aimed that with the help of my editor and staff, and I managed to get COVID at Glasgow at the Golans Fest party, which beautifully bookends what you were just saying. It's the COVID series,
The co-
and somebody asked me at Glasgow if the constant biowarfare theme about the in artifact space where the
Mhm.
bad guys are trying to release some sort of two-part killer virus was that from COVID, and I'm like, I not intentionally, but let's face it, when you're writing a book in the middle of a giant disease, maybe disease is in the background of your
Yeah,
Comes to mind.
you're for
and
sure.
I
I
will say that
mean,
I'm writing the I'm sorry, go ahead.
well, I was about to add, this is probably where you're going. Uh, I remember it was supposed to be at least a trilogy when you were originally working on this series. Do you fear writing a next book in this series because you know it will again give you COVID?
So I hadn't thought of it just that way, but I will say I'm on page about 350 of the third book. It's called Whale Song. And I'll just do a spoiler. I've invented something called biobombs, which are human beings who don't know it, but they've been basically primed to be giant carrier spreaders of
Wow.
lethal lethal viruses. So they're like suicide bombers, but they don't know, and they're just given an injection and pushed into a spaceport. And of course, in the closed environment of a spaceport, uh, infection is going to spread enormously
Mhm.
fast, and you can just imagine where that goes. And
Well,
so there is definitely a continuing thread there.
Mhm.
And one of the things I believe as an author is that it's not just writing what you know. To some extent, you need to write things that seem familiar or interesting to your readers.
mhm.
If they're too out there, a lot of readers are turned off. And let's face it, we all went through COVID.
Yes.
Everybody now knows a lot more about biology and
Mm.
genetics and research. And then, anyway, I swear I did not start Arcana Imperii to write about microbiology.
Well,
However,
now you're on what I would consider a COVID podcast because we started in 2020 when we were locked down with nothing to do. So very on brand, very on
okay,
brand.
well, here we are. I'm here for you guys, and I always have been,
Well,
Yeah,
we strongly
except for
appreciate
that
that.
one time.
The
Oh,
yeah, but
but
getting big time by Christian Cameron was on the bucket list, so that
on the
actually
bucket.
helped us. Yeah, like because we'd done the interviews and we had a lot of fun, but getting big time was also fun in its own way. So,
Mhm.
um, so Christian, I'm thinking about this bio warfare aspect, and that really stuck out to me. This idea of like writing to the public consciousness and how that like something big happens in the world, like a pandemic, and suddenly that opens up more of what is familiar to just like the average person in the audience. That was a really cool idea. You speak more to that.
Yes, but I want to say it's not anyway. It's not as deliberate as all that. But uh, look, at the risk of speaking of an author for whom I do not have a tremendous amount of personal respect, J.K. Rowling basically wrote about high school, and we all went to high school.
Yeah.
And a lot of people like to pretend that high school wasn't a profound experience, but let's face it, high school was a profound experience for most people. And so by doing that, J.K. Rowling, right or wrong, good or bad, really did an interesting thing with fantasy in saying, like, yeah, there's magic, but on the other hand, the base experience is something all of you have had. And I remember looking at that as a writer and going, right, and fighting in armor is not an experience all of you have had.
Maybe
And
just certain people like you, Christian.
no, but that's exactly my point. So when I write something that is way outside people's experience, like fighting in armor, I try and write it immersively so that you go like, oh, of course you sweat a lot in armor. Oh, that's, like, oh, you mean the flanges of your knees can catch on each other? Wow, that's horrific. Like, and I want to cover that, but at other times, and I'll just use like bioweapons as an example, you go, okay, now I have a public that is, if they've been watching, pretty well educated on the like basics of research, and they probably know what RNA and DNA are and stuff like that, or they've had that education reinforced. So I can be a little less immersive in describing these things. I can just sort of suggest it and it can go by. What I don't do, I hope, and I certainly didn't intend this with Artifact Space, is go like, oh, what's the public like discourse right now? I'm going to aim my book at it. Because my first serious editor and my dad, who was a writer in his own, both said, like, the problem with doing that is the 2-year production cycle means that no matter what you think the public is interested in, you'll be wrong. And I watch some people try and like, oh, let's make it about Donald Trump. Yeah, does anybody care about Donald Trump? I mean, like, okay, people care, but like, did they care at the moment that your novel came out? And maybe
Especially
this
as
is
much
too
as they did.
maybe this is too much honesty, but my experience, which maybe is just my experience, but I've talked to a few other authors. My experience is that when your book comes out, you have like 2 weeks to a month grace period in which you're kind of the hero and people pay attention to your book. But somebody said there were 700 novels coming out a month. Like, talk about your deep TBR pile. Even if there's just, let's say, 50 mainstream fantasy and sci-fi novels coming out a month, you're lucky if you get 2 weeks in the lens of social media. You guys, bloggers, care for 2 weeks. And fitting those 2 weeks into the set of you aimed at interesting the public in something that 2 years ago you thought would be interesting doesn't sound like a very good idea. I would not recommend it. Whereas being aware that the zeitgeist has gone in this way and you can now talk about it in a different way, I think that's actually part of good writing. And I think it's one of the reasons that if you go back and read F. Scott Fitzgerald, to give you an example, you kind of go, ooh, kind of racist and misogynist.
Yeah.
Because that's the voice of then. And it's not always bad. I've actually been reading a bunch of Victorian hunting and fishing novels. Some of them are very good, mostly because there aren't enough women or racial people in the novel to offend me if they were ever to let on what they actually thought. But sometimes they're very, very good. But yeah, that's what I'm trying to say about the sort of the cultural change is like, yeah, trying to predict 2 years in advance in your publishing cycle. For indie authors, I would wonder if you could, because indie authors can turn around very fast because they're doing it themselves. I'd be interested to see if you could write a political, not quite cozy fantasy and aim it at a particular event like the Democratic National Convention or something, and whether
And
that
just
would work.
focus on like really fast turnaround times and
Yeah.
and just be able to hit that topical moment quickly. It's interesting, yeah. And but I think what, some of the ways that you've kind of avoided this and stumbled onto some of these things by accident is building on your experiences and what you mentioned earlier about focusing on connecting with people on levels that we can all relate to. And one of the things that we talked about a lot when we talked about artifact space was the whole like the inspiration of your military background and like life on a big ship and things like that, and translating that kind of life into this merchant ship that is the Athens, this giant great ship in space. So to read and borrow going through like, yeah, you're traveling through space and you've this incredible feat, but you also have to, find your laundry and you have to have roommates and you have relationships and things like that. And I was looking forward to diving back into that all these years later with Deep Black. And one of the things that I found like particularly interesting was as you continue to build on this theme, I want to just jump right into one of your big, what I see as a really interesting theme here is like the um, the Athens is a commerce ship, right? Yet it is increasingly involved in warfare, and it's like, well, let's face it, it's basically a government entity, right? It's having ships all around the world, it's fighting people. So how did you explore the tension between commerce and warfare, and how did you bring that into this sci-fi epic?
Okay, so two things. Actually, three things. I'm going to go back to something that was said earlier and say
Mm.
there's now going to be 4 or 5 books in this series, not just three.
Mm.
Wow.
And that I just say that to inform my answer.
Mm.
Um, so to some extent, Arcana Imperii, Secrets of Empire. Arcana
Mm.
Imperii means the secrets of empire,
Mm.
Mm.
is about a moment in a future history where a kind of nice trade-based but very socialist government becomes a gigantic empire. Um, One of my favorite comments, although I didn't think I was doing this. Somebody said, "Have you guys read Ian Banks' culture novels?"
No.
Oh,
No.
okay. Well, anyway, somebody's like, Christian is explaining how the culture came to be. It's a much farther future where this AI-driven sort of superpower they're really nice and they're really well governed and they basically let AIs handle everything because nobody trusts people.
Mm.
Mm.
Anyway, uh, to go back to your question, I I wanted, like, I have a character in the third book who's literally left the DHC merchant service because he didn't ever want to be in a navy,
Mhm.
and he joined a merchant service, and I try and keep bringing that out because even my own experience of the military was the difference between doing a lot of relief work, like famine relief and stuff, and then all of a sudden, hey, actually, we're going to shoot Iraqis. And
Yikes.
a lot of people had been in the military 10, 15 years. They'd never fired a shot in anger. They'd
Mm.
done a lot of humanitarian relief and they'd been on a lot of exercises. And I remember that moment where people were like, "Oh, right. This is not maybe what I signed up for or
Mm.
not what I was used to." And I think that's a great moment because I think readers, especially military sci-fi readers, take for granted that blowing aliens up in space is fine.
Mm.
Um,
Mm.
and at the risk of sounding really too lefty, I I think there used to be, I think it's changed, but there used to be a sort of idea that like a, a weirdly xenophobic, literally xenophobic idea that um, it was okay to kill aliens in books,
Mm.
like, you know, and then uh, I would expect that given the way civilization seems to be charting ideas of freedoms and acceptance over the last 20 years, that very quickly after discovering actual sentient aliens, we'd probably go like, no, you can't discriminate against aliens and you can't blow up their ships. That's that.
Mm.
not an acceptable civilized behavior. And I kind of wanted to cover that off too. And I thought it would be more fun from the point of a merchant service. But also, the merchant service was at the bedrock of what occurred to me, because I often start with history, and I started with Venice. So Venice's trade ships could also fight pirates and participate in giant naval battles, but Venice didn't ever want to really fight anyone. Really. I mean, there were a couple of exceptions, but mostly Venice, even when they were trapped into a giant war like the Battle of Lepanto, as fast as they could get out of it, they would, because their whole system ran on trade, and war and trade are not friends, which is the point that I will be making in the next two novels.
Interesting.
And the other thing is, I think I'm almost going back to the first discussion we just had, but so in the third and fourth books, you're going to see that in the aftermath of the victory that makes Deep Black, I don't know, sort of resonate, very little has changed, and a lot of people hate the DHC. And at one point, a character says, yeah, your enormous victory killed 400 ships and about 25,000 people. There's 25 billion people living out on the rim, and they still don't like you. Like, you haven't changed anything. And like, if people, and I'm going back to sort of zeitgeist and learning, if people have been paying attention to ISIS, Iraq, Afghanistan, they realize that no matter how great your small special forces team is, they're not necessarily changing anybody's mind. And you can defeat people militarily in the field, but quite frankly, you haven't changed anything, because the operation involved, this is a gross, cruel thing to say, but the operation involved hasn't actually affected enough people to change everybody's mind. And so when we think of, I don't know, Star Wars or Star Trek, and we think of these ships and these naval fleets, but if the people hated the Empire in Star Wars, and the Rebel fleet is absolutely wiped out, how many men and women and aliens is that? Like 25,000 out of billions?
Right.
Are their minds changed? Because the current experience of even our modern warfare is you didn't actually kill enough people to change anybody's mind. That is a terrible thing to say, but it is kind of an underlying current already in Deep Black. It's there, and it's just going to roll forward, that what's going on the fringe isn't maybe stoppable. It's not about war. It has to be solved a different way.
No, that's well said, because even like when there are elements of warfare in Deep Black, sometimes it's like it happens so fast, and it's done a lot through AI and computers, that like sometimes the soldiers are more detached from the warfare than ever before. And you have a character like our main character in Borrow, who goes through those struggles personally. Of she's participated in all these battles, she's increasingly building up her, prestige as this war hero, or this myth is starting to build around her, and she still is like, I don't feel like I did anything or changed anything. Like, I'm still like her mantra for this whole thing is like, I'm just an idiot. And so it's kind of interesting to see both the macro level that sci-fi allows, and then the micro level with Embaro too.
Well, I had so many story arcs I was trying to accomplish, and whether I accomplished them or not is up to you guys and other readers. But in Barrow's neural lace is like both a hard artifact and an allegory. Like it's sort of an allegory for the way we use technology and the way we do or don't think about, consequences, expected and unexpected, right? And I hope if you followed that arc, that you see by the end of the novel that the neural lace is going to kill the great ship. There's going to be no great ships. There's going to be like 3 people who don't even need a bridge. And they'll I don't know, be sitting in seats in a room, or maybe it won't be, maybe they'll be in their staterooms. Maybe they'll never leave some sort of bubble, and they'll control everything with their neural laces at the practically molecular level, and everything that Embaro likes about being in space will be gone. The large
Mm.
crews, the feeling of family, the like, and I mean, without being completely personal, we're almost there. Not necessarily with neural laces, but um, the point I'm trying to make is like there's not going to be these small spaceships, these sort of fighters and stuff. That's all going to be gone because it's all going to be AI driven, and you can just see into the future that everything you thought was cool about the Athens will
Mm.
not survive this technological
Mm.
change. And I think that
Yeah.
that's one of the points I wanted to make, because one of the things that I do uh, sometimes not love in science fiction is that science fiction writers don't always see that the rate of change we're experiencing now, we've been experiencing that since about 1820. And
Mm.
it's accelerating, but not as much as people think. This is now the norm. You can
Mm.
read whole novels written in the 1850s, literally the 1850s, that are like, well, I live in an unrecognizable world. When I was a child, this was the norm. It's all gone. You know, there's a railroad through the middle of what was a wilderness when I was a kid.
Yeah.
I can get from Cincinnati, which wasn't even a town,
Mm.
to
Right.
you know, right. And they, like, I've been reading a bunch of these novels, and it's worthwhile to say the rate of technological change is so enormous, and I feel that has to be reflected in sci-fi. Why would it
Yeah,
slow down in the future? So I
for
wanted
sure.
to, I'm way off your subject, Charles, and
No.
I apologize, but I wanted to, while having the coolness, while having the battles, I also wanted to go like, none of this will continue to exist. Anyway, sorry.
Right.
Yeah. Christian, something that was really interesting that you're talking about there, among the many interesting things, of course, was this idea of the neural lace coming to, if you project out, eventually eliminate all of the things that would be I guess interesting about space travel, exciting about space travel, and it's interesting now. I'm thinking about it juxtaposed against the title of Deep Black, and just even I was thinking about what's on the back of this beautiful book that we have here. Um, it's not like a summary of the book; it's a passage taken out of the book, and it's pretty much about uh Navarro just looking out at like the we got that moment where it's like they said the title, the deep black absence of light was beautiful, and so was the vast brilliance of the infinite pinpoints of light created by all the stars. Like we go through just the beauty and the aesthetic of it. We have Quack Quack saying, "Are you space sick?" And then Navarro says, no, I'm in awe of the universe. So this idea of deep black, I imagine the title, a lot of the theme of the book is about the beauty of just being in space in the middle of nowhere of space and the majesty of that. And then that's juxtaposed against this idea of technology, especially the neural lace, like probably destroying that, or at least destroying our ability to appreciate that. Is that like something that was on your mind?
You've nailed it. And again, I'm going to go back to medieval Venice. So medieval Venice ran on trade, and at its height, when the whole system worked, virtually everybody, regardless of social class, went to sea. And that shared experience of going to sea was essential when Venice was on the ropes. This thing that they'd all done together, whether they were guys who pushed the rope into the cracks between the boards or the Doge, they'd done all these things together, and that was the basis of their society. Literally, that they were all ship's crews together. I won't. I don't plan to write novels about the fall of the DHC, but what could be happening is that as they neural lace their crews so that a great ship is a much smaller ship with only 3 or 4 human beings on board with AI supporting them, suddenly the population of the DHC goes from being directly involved in interstellar trade at every level with literally millions of people who have been out there and participated and seen the vastness, to a tiny professionalized group of basically cyborgs who run all that while everybody else sits home. Hey, that's what happened to Venice. When their overseas trade collapsed, they no longer took their lower classes to sea, and then the aristocrats didn't go to sea either. And then basically they just became a sort of very decadent. It wasn't. It was more complicated than that, but it greatly contributed to the collapse of Venice as a society. And so, unexpected consequence. Hey, we can make this cheaper and better, and we can automate it all. But then we won't be a giant cohesive society of traders who all do this together.
Mm.
So yes, you are exactly right, and that was on my mind all the time, because I don't know if one of you is planning to ask about this, but like also at the heart of this, and this was before I'd even heard of ChatGPT, to be honest, because I guess I'm slow, was are the AIs good or bad?
Right.
Is the technology good or bad? And my answer as an author is technology is never either good or bad. It is just surprising. It is always surprising, and the effects are surprising.
Right. And I did actually have a question on AI because you have Morosini and his holographic cat who is the AI that kind of drives the ship of the Athens, and he's almost like this all-knowing character too, who's like, oh, I didn't want to reveal everything to you because those moments that you get like at the end of fantasy books, which I enjoyed. And it's kind of funny because we're talking about, this book was written, before like now ChatGPT is what's everyone's talking about, but it's one of those things where it's like if you were to try to write a book about ChatGPT in the series, you would have to be starting like now, So, well, I was kind of curious as to what your inspiration was for Morosini and the AI character and how you see this role of AI in the Arcana Imperii as you expand this world, because you talk about technology like reducing human connection, but here's a AI character almost indistinguishable from a human being, except for his long red flowing robes.
And the fact that he will cheerfully kill 12,
Yeah.
15,000 people without
Yeah.
literally without turning a hair because there's no actual emotion involved. And that's the plan. And
Mhm.
look, I mean, I can hit this on a number of levels. I read some good articles about government use of AI. I mean, and when we say I was just at a conference or a panel at University of Toronto on AI, and I was the sci-fi guy with a bunch of
Nice.
scientists. And curiously, what we all agreed on is that language learning models aren't AI. And the neurologist turned to me and said, I was going to say that because I said, it's a dead end. It's not going to go anywhere. Like we were asked to predict where the current AI, and I'm like, that already the big ones are sort of eating themselves because as they provide bullshit answers, the bullshit answers then become part of their learning model. So
Mhm.
so once they've given you a basically incorrect or unstudied answer, that's now in the set of things they'll look at the next time somebody asks that question. And that has turned out to be a bit of a problem. Anyway, there's other problems. And I am not a microbiologist or a neurologist or any of the people who were talking about this. I just sat there going like, I am unsurprised. Okay, fair. But there are things that the language learning model AIs do well. And I'll give you a stupid example, but uniform enforcement of very complicated environmental laws. That's actually something that the AI will never make a mistake. The AI is going to go like, no, I've counted the parts per million of your lead release, and you are breaking the law. Yet can't be bribed, can't be fixed, can't be taken out. I mean, all of those things could be done, but much harder than inspectors who only occasionally get to look. Just imagine a plant that releases a certain amount of wastewater, and imagine the difference between inspectors having to measure the wastewater and a little device that measures every ounce, every milligram that comes out and is fed through what is basically an AI that goes like, bad, giant fine. Human beings arrive with, badges and guns. Um, there are things that already that AI can just do better, much more cheaply than we can. And that, I mean, I hope I'm answering your question, but just reading about that, and I think that was back in 2019, I'm like, okay, this is going to go somewhere. And
Right.
then against that, um, you guys don't know Ian Banks' culture books. I adore them, and the very best. Ian Banks passed away a few years ago, but the very best part is his lovely, horrible AIs, because every
Mm.
ship is completely computerized. This is the far future. If my novels happen in 2700
Mm.
or 2800, his novels happen in like 28,000. You know, it's
Wow,
like
I see.
it's a long, long way. But the ships, and they're called minds. The ship minds, they communicate, and they're hilarious and nasty and very, very inhuman and yet somewhat human. And I loved those, and I always thought it was going to be I was going to have an AI at the core of each one of these great ships. And then I realized that in the meta plot, which I'll tell you, but it never really surfaces. The meta plot is that um, the usual suspects, you know, people who want power and money, want to bring the DHC down and replace it with whatever. Like they're probably not sure amongst themselves. They just want to knock it down so they can have more power and money. I think we've all, again, it's the zeitgeist. We know that
Hmm.
there are these people and they're out there.
Hmm.
Um, and to do that, instead of fighting giant battles, they want to take down the bureaucracy cores, the AIs that basically run all the social services, because that is
Hmm.
another thing that, you know, AI probably will do brilliantly. So they just want to knock those down, um, because that will eliminate. You're never really told this, but in the DHC, all voting is basically online, and you do it every morning. You get up and you look, because it's actually a democracy. So you get like
Mm.
280 questions that you're voting on this morning, and every citizen can vote, and you just kind of go like yes, no, no, send it to the great council, don't care, don't care, don't care, right? And you
Right.
you you riffle through, and everybody does it every morning, and that's just part of being a citizen of the DHC. But if you can knock down the voting cores, no one can vote, and then you can replace that very quickly with tyranny, which, if you feel like that's maybe a gentle reflection of things going on in the United States, Great Britain, and other countries, you know, once in a while I am referential to the real world.
No, that's interesting because yeah, it's finding its role, right? Because there's ways in which that AI can be used to try and take down some of these societal things as well. And you touch on that. But one of the other, we talked about the Neuralink and we talked about Morosini, but there's also this element, a large central part of Deep Black is this romance between Envaro and Dorcas. And there's a large chunk of this novel where Dorcas is like plugged in to the ship and is kind of focusing on these elements of like, ooh, I can like make scientific discoveries. This is great. And it kind of gets in the way of his relationship a little bit with Embaro. And so I wanted to also like, how does interpersonal relationships kind of take, a front seat in Deep Black, especially with Embaro and Dorcas? And was the decision from the beginning to make this sort of like have the romance be such a integral part of the story?
So interesting you should ask that. I think I knew from the beginning. I did not know that Dorcas and Barrow were going to be a thing. That was not planned at all.
Hmm.
Um, uh, that just happened, and I just watched it happen, because sometimes I'm a discovery writer, and I just kind of like went, okay, well, this is interesting. And um, traditionally in romance novels, which I read from time to time, you know, the people meet, they fall for each other, but then barriers are put in their way, and then usually they part and whatever. I don't really like that kind of genre fiction that's that stratified, but I
Hmm.
wanted, once I had committed to Embaro and Dorcas, which was like page 100 of Deep Black, I was like, all right, but something has to go wrong, because that makes it for a better arc.
Hmm.
And I didn't want it to be any of the like the traditional things. She thinks he's cheating on her. He thinks she's cheating on her. Like I can give you 20 of these. They all bore me. And they're not the kind of things that these two characters that I've created would really involve themselves in. So
Right.
instead, I decided to go for, Dorcas's equivalent of cheating on her is to go five-dimensional math. I can just do that forever.
Yeah.
um,
Yeah.
uh, in this basically holodeck. Uh,
Right.
I'm sorry, honey, I forgot you existed there for 4 months. Um, and like, because I was like, what would it be like to have sort of a Matrix level plugin, and then there's unlike the Matrix, there's reality right there. You can go back to it. Like, you guys ever read a comic but brilliant sci-fi called Red Dwarf
I've
TV
heard of
show?
it, but I've not seen it or
Uh,
read it. I
so
know of
there's
it
a
though.
there this is when video games and online games barely existed, but the brilliant writer immediately came up with the game, which is called Better Than Life. And the problem with it is better than life. So anybody who goes into it, they usually don't come out. And one whole novel, like book 3 or 4, turns out to be inside Better Than Life. And if you'd been paying attention in like the first 10 pages, the main character discovers that his long lost girlfriend still loves him, marries her, and starts having kids in the ideal house in the ideal town, and then has adventures. And if you were paying attention, you'd be like, this is way less realistic, even in a comedy. But by page 200, you're like, okay, well, these are, wow, it's very cozy. And then all of a sudden he goes like, oh no, I'm in Better Than Life. Like, um, I kind of wanted Better Than Life. Like, I
Mhm.
wanted Dorcas to experience Better Than Life.
And it's funny to see that being the contention. And the other thing, on Embaro's side, because she's not doing five-dimensional math, but she is kind of funny. I was thinking of a way to describe this book, and it's like Embaro takes on her greatest challenge yet, social nuances and interpersonal relationships, because in the center of all this AI warfare and neurolinks and like politics and commerce is Enbaro like navigating some really basic social dynamics and not being sure of what to do and not being able to like, you know, give herself grace when it's merited, and then not also being able to take a step back and like know when not to get involved. And so in her relationship, there's this piece where she's like I'm just an idiot. I don't know if I can connect with Dorcas, and I'm getting in the way and this and that. So it's kind of funny to see instead of having that typical like rom-com miscommunication, it's like I've got a neural link in my brain. I'm not gonna miss a communication from you, but I can still, at the very basic human level, have this like imposter like response. And I feel so much as Embaro like stepping up as a leader and learning how to be that person and almost going through some sort of imposter syndrome type stuff to get there. And this relationship with Dorcas and overcoming that to actually maintain that relationship is a huge part of it.
So thanks. You've basically done my novel brilliantly. That was the intention, because
Mhm.
I love that we can, it's like a Billy Connolly routine. I can just keep circling around to the beginning. Um,
Mhm.
Everybody's been in a relationship.
Mhm.
At least I hope so. I guess there are some people who have never been in a relationship, and I'm sorry, but um, and uh, ultimately we're not computers and we don't have neural laces, but we do have interpersonal problems.
Mhm.
And one of the things that directly comes from my own like military career is that I was there for the first video phones where we could do this, what we're doing now. And certainly I was there for the interweb, which the clandestine world or the secret world had before the rest of the world. Like, we could talk to each other and whatever.
Mhm.
And my experience was that ultimately, nonetheless, almost everything depended on personal skills, and that um, I can't tell you how many times when I worked counterterrorism, I would become so frustrated by trying to explain a very complicated real world political problem to 20 people on a call like this, that I would
Mhm.
get in my car and drive across Washington, D.C. to some other intelligence center and go like, people, let's have a coffee, let's talk this through, because human expression, human interaction still beats the hell out of. Now, ours weren't as good as this. Frankly, Zoom is better than anything the U.S. military had in the 90s, which is a sad, sad comment. But
And it
nonetheless,
cost $10 billion.
yeah, it probably did. Probably did. But and Zoom probably got the technology for nothing anyway,
Yeah.
from your taxpayer dollars. What I'm trying to say is my life experience is that ultimately the human trumps the technology. And isn't that sort of what Star Trek is about? Isn't that what Kirk and Spock are constantly like, nah, it's not all rationality, it's not all what, and that's a long-term theme in all space opera, I think. I just happen to actually believe in that theme. I believe that ultimately what matters, and sorry, I wanted to say this earlier when we were talking about AI and the neural lace, and so I'm sort of saying this to both of you at the same time. When I was on this panel at U of T, something was clarified for me that I clearly believed when writing the books, but didn't say explicitly. I wasn't even sure of it myself, but a person in the crowd asked, like, so do you think we should just go to all unmanned space missions, like unpersoned space missions? We'll do it all with robots. And basically 3 of the 5 people on the panel were like, yeah, there's no point whatsoever in putting people in space. And I'm like, wait, you're missing the whole point. Human experience. If we're not in space, who cares? Like, and it turned out that was the feeling of 100% of the people sitting watching, a lot of whom were like grad students and stuff, are like, oh no, wait, no, I don't actually want Mars explored by robots. I want Mars explored by me. And so that I'm kind of going back to both of your questions, but like, yeah, the neural lace is great. Now, having only 3 people on the ship is probably financially responsible, but at an ultimate level, the reason Enbaro has this emotive response to space is that it's beautiful and incredible, and it's the deep black. Yeah, see, you were right all along. Sorry. No, your microphone's off.
Dylan, we can't hear you.
Oh, I don't know. I got muted there. I was coughing. I pressed the cough button and I just never unpressed it. But I do love hearing. I was right, Christian.
You were right, Dylan. Yeah,
of course. But I will say you had me thinking about with this idea of, well, should we just do only unmanned space travel? It's like the point of space travel is for us to experience it. And I was thinking about back when the mission to land on the moon was going on. And there's this speech that I am sure with your knowledge of history, you're aware of, that JFK gave at Rice, like the university. And he compared it to, they're like, why do you go to the moon? Like, why do you want to go to the moon? He said, we choose to go to the moon. And he's like, well, why does Rice play Texas? Like Rice, this like underdog university, why they play this giant University of Texas who just beats the crap out of them. And it is, he said, we choose to go to the moon this decade, not because that will be easy, but because it will be hard. And it's like the challenge as well, just like to achieve things, to experience them. Like that is what's important. We're doing it for our own human experience. And I just thought that was resonating really well with that. But
I am sorry, Dylan, because you were totally right, and I was going to get to that point, and then I digressed. And so, like, 7 points, you get the conversion as well. That was absolutely at the core of the novel. Like
Rice down 52-7 after
the and Charles, the reason I put romance in is because 2 things. One, slightly off-color joke. We used to say, like, so we're at sea for 6 months, and if you put 2 human beings of the appropriate gender alignment together and close the door, within 24 hours they'll have sex. Now, that wasn't always true, but oh my God, like So um, uh, a recognition of that, I think, would be an important part of forming up your space crews. And then you want to avoid it being all about sexual politics. So now, like the modern military says, right, the answer to that is nobody can have sex with each other. And I'm sure that works brilliantly for everyone. Because God knows abstinence works in every other part of our society. But another way to look at it would be that there would probably be romance going on 6,000
Yeah.
crew, 10-kilometer long ship. And then I thought, like, well, if there is, I guess it's fine. I hadn't actually set out, as I said, and Barrow was going to be too damaged emotionally to engage in romance right up through Richard Hanna invited her out on a date. And I'm like, where'd that come from? But last night I was talking to a modestly famous filmmaker, and he was asking about like writing character, and he's like, did the characters ever surprise you? All the time.
Yeah.
Like, and I know people who write it all out in outlines, and good for them. Like, every writer is different. But for me, the best part is when Richard Hanna appears. He wasn't even going to be a character, and then he asks her out on a date, and the moment they started going out in artifact space, I knew it wasn't going to work. And I'm like, hey, nobody ever does this in science fiction.
Right.
Like, and that was fun all by itself. And anyway, and I had no intention of Dorcas being a love interest. In fact, I'm very Dickensian the way I pick my names. Dorcas, because he's a dork. Like, actually, sadly, based on my dad, who was an incredibly intelligent, if slightly over-focused person. But yeah, that was not my plan. That just sort of
So then
happened.
that begs the question, where did Quack Quack come from?
Well, so one of my favorite characters, actually. So I live in Canada, and I actually want some Canadian content in my novels. Canada, you notice that the United States and Canada are never overtly mentioned ever in.
Yeah, because I know you mentioned like Texas, like the greater Texas,
Yeah.
this new entity, but new Texas, right?
Let's just say that North
rice.
America didn't do particularly well in the future, but the Inuit did. So Quack Quack is an Inuit, and Quack Quack is an Inuit name, and her being short and very stocky and very space adapted all comes from reading an article about Inuit people and their sort of genome and stuff like that. And I just thought that was fun and sort of unexpected. Like, yeah, the Far North First Nations character is the brilliant science officer instead of Spock.
Right.
And also gave me a chance to use my so-called sense of humor, because Quack Quack is with Thea, the queen of the one-liners and the gentle put-downs, and that's based on people I know.
Right. I'm trying to remember which character said it, but there was a great line. Someone was like talking to Nbaro, and they said something like, "You don't have to be the hero all the time. It's actually causing everyone problems." And I was like, that's an interesting perspective to take, because for so much sci-fi, especially space opera, it's like the hero does something bold and brave and saves everybody, and it's like, no, you can't. You're a respected officer with $1 billion Neuralink, like, and plus, like, we had plans for this that you're getting in the way of. Was that Quack Quack? I can't remember who said that to her.
No, it's Trukner says it to her over and over again, really. And Trukner is based on one of my squadron commanders, who was an amazing leader. And he, I mean, I wasn't a hero, so he never had to say that to me, but he did say it to my pilot once. And he used to say, people, your maintenance reports have to be in on time, no matter what you did yesterday. You still have to fill out your maintenance report. And I kind of wanted to get that feeling across. And I know an officer who got a fitness report that said, this officer will make a brilliant admiral if only he can survive as a lieutenant. And like, there's a lot of like, yeah, space opera tends to say like, ooh, the incredible heroism, and then back at the ranch, it's like, yeah, there's an engineering officer who had to repair your plane for the 300th time. And why is that person not the hero?
Right.
So
Right.
yeah,
Yeah, that's funny. It's like kind of like James Bond in Q, where he's just like, please bring this back. This is an
yes.
expensive piece of technology. And James Bond's like, I don't care, I'll blow it up. Aston Martin, I'll drive it into a wall, like whatever.
Yeah,
So
but if even 10 kilometers long, the Athens is, really running out of stuff by the end of the novel. And so you can only fail to bring the Aston Martin back so many times before Q goes like, well, okay, I guess you're sitting the rest of this out because we're out of space frames.
yeah, we knew times were tough when Mimbaro ran out of coffee and had to
Yeah.
barter with
Yeah.
Dorcas. I felt that. I was like, wow. Now we're really strapped, Got to get my pound of coffee. It's
I
just a
said on
lot.
Twitter that the big bad in Deep Black is actually caffeine
That
withdrawal. So
that was my
it's
that was my favorite. I gotta say,
yeah.
Dylan, I loved that comment.
I'm
It
glad to
it
hear
it
that.
it meant that you had seen deep into my brain.
And Deep Black is really not about that quote I mentioned earlier. It's
No, it's about
about
coffee.
how Embaro
Yeah.
likes her coffee, right?
Yeah, yeah. Okay, you've got it. You are now
I just,
complete.
yeah.
We cracked the code.
We figured it out
It's
finally. All
actually
the
all
hidden meanings.
it's all about coffee. That
Yeah.
Definitely. Then and that's, that was the case with Artifact Space too. The coffee trade that they were doing on the side was one of my favorite subplots. And speaking of Artifact Space, and as we kind of wrap up on time here, when we talked last, you were like, "Yeah, we'll see how this book does. I have this trilogy plan. We'll see how it goes." You've mentioned already in this episode that it's much bigger than that. We had Beyond the Fringe, which was the short story collection, which I had a fun time listening to and hearing your voice come up. Where you were like, "Oh, this is a story based on something an old veteran told me," and I was like, "Oh yeah, see, this is this is exactly what I would expect from Christian making an appearance on
that
his
was
own story."
my Uncle Donald's best friend. He was an OSS officer in the
Ah.
Second World War. Yeah.
Wow.
Interesting. That was a good story too. So, it's like this, it seems to be like, you went from like this, oh, I'm gonna try this debut fantasy thing, we'll see how it goes, to now it seems like you're all in, which is great. So I was wondering like the future of the Arcana Imperii series and where it's going, what your plans are, how big are we going here?
So look, if Gillian Redfern's listening, I could write these forever. But the arc, the basic, wow, the basic super meta of this is
Mhm.
that there are these two alien races who have been fighting each other for
Hmm.
a really long time, and may or may not, each separately or together, have committed utter racial genocide against a third
Yeah.
and fourth alien race. And as our story opens, humanity only knows of one of these races. By the end of
Hmm.
Deep Black, you know of two, and you have some clues towards the genocide. The
Mhm.
meta arc. The last book is called The Aliens War. The Aliens War, not the Alien War. Because
Mm.
by then, Embaro, who's going to be very powerful, and Morosini, I don't mind discussing this arc, have decided that there is no future for humanity in engaging the aliens war. Like they need to not have the giant fleet action to end the whatever.
Right.
And so what do you do? Look at Israel and Hamas. What do you do? What do you do when Israel and Hamas are actually 50 times bigger than you and have better technology, and they're fighting next door, and it's going to get you? Like, do you build huge borders in space? So that's the meta conflict is what to do with the aliens war. So
Mm.
um, uh, getting there will be a bit of a journey, and I might have to have another book of short fiction to sort of point the reader I really liked what the short. I'd never done this before, right? I really liked what the short fiction accomplished, um,
Mhm.
because it enabled me to go like, actually, these other things are happening, and here's some clues as to the meta plot, and here's some clues about the archaeology that's going on, because the xenoarchaeology matters. And by the way, I'm going to digress just for a second and say, um, a harsh criticism I have received 3 or 4 times now. I do read almost all my uh, critiques, is that I don't explain what happened to the circles. And I'm like, dude, we don't know what happened to the Mycenaeans. And that was on our
Mm.
planet 2,000 years ago.
Mhm.
I was really taken aback by that, because I'm like, what? You think that in the universe everything will be explained? We don't
Yeah.
understand how gravity works. Um, uh, anyway, so I do know what happened to the circles, but it's like, I'm not sure it's ever going to be part of the books, because I'm just going to say this and hope that at least one of the critics is listening to the podcast, because in the world of, let's say, security professionalism, once you know there's a threat, you don't really need to know that much more about it. You just go like, okay, this is a real threat. So the knowledge that the circles were genocided is sufficient to cause the DHC's AIs and the PTX's AIs to go like, so they could do that to us. And
Mhm.
that's the only part that matters. What
Right.
actually happened, not actually that pertinent. But I guess I will satisfy readers eventually by having Dorcas figure out exactly what happened, because clearly people do not
Yeah.
like a mystery. Whereas my experience as a historian, especially of the Bronze Age, I love the Bronze Age. Nobody knows what
Yeah,
happened at the end of the Bronze Age, and that was like
Yeah.
right here on our planet.
And when you're writing a
right.
story where
It's
military intelligence is like such a critical part, it's like making decisions off of what you don't know is a big part, and it adds to the excitement and the interest of that. It's like, well, here's what we know, and there's a million things we don't know, but I've got to make a decision, and it's going to affect the whole ship. And oh, by the way, I got to make it with a neural link in a millisecond, and so to me that's part of the intrigue. And so I'm looking forward to it's exciting to see like you're a sci-fi author now, man. Like you're in it.
I also want to put in a plug for the fantasy series that I just sold. You're the
Oh,
first people I've
ooh, an
you
exclusive.
ooh,
it's an
breaking news.
exclusive. Yeah. It, like I say, it's a sort of Victorian. See, the problem is when you say Victorian, people immediately think steampunk. And while I guess
Mhm.
there will be one or two steampunkish um attitudes, it's more about maybe the other side of the Victorian world with racial inequality, labor unrest, uh, First Nations genocide, that part of the Victorian world that
Mm,
I feel all too often steampunk fails to address altogether. And that doesn't
mm,
mean there won't be a ragtag band of fugitive heroes to save everybody, but
right.
um, it's very grimdark. It's actually pretty
Hmm.
darn dark. Uh,
Ooh,
Necromancy is a fairly standard part of everyday life. Uh, Gunpowder is made by rendering down the souls of criminals. Um,
Mm.
and you can immediately imagine the space for abuse in a society that can only get gunpowder by rendering
You
down
couldn't exploit that
criminals.
system at all.
No, no, nothing bad could possibly happen. Um, and the elves are basically like 11-foot tall Sasquatches who live in the hills and are gradually being genocided so that all their land and stuff can be taken, if that seems like anything that maybe
Wow.
happened in the 19th century. Um, yeah, good times, good times. And I wrote the first novel is already done. I wrote the first, it's called The Land. Um,
Mm,
Mm.
I wrote the first book with almost exactly the same, like, incredible. Okay, it's incredible to me. You don't have to find it incredible, but like I wrote it in like 50 days, like I wrote Artifact Space. And I think it's really
Wow.
good and really strong. And despite that, I now want to write science fiction for the rest of my life. It's just that, like Alistair Reynolds, my hero, um,
Mhm.
I think Arcana Imperii is my universe. And I
mm,
don't think
Mm.
I don't think I want to jump off. So Artifact Space and Deep Black are basically a duology about Marka and Barrow. She's at the center,
Mhm.
she's the hero, she's the protagonist. There it is. In book three, um, I've already done a public reading of the prologue. she's almost killed in the first scene, and she's basically in a healing tank for the whole book. So
Wow.
she occurs thoughtfully in chapter heads, and the book is about other people. And
Mhm.
that's quite deliberate because um, it's not Horatio Hornblower. I am not writing Patrick O'Brien. It's not Marka and Barrow, the superhero, doing everything. So
Right.
we go off and we see other people in, well, yeah, we can see other people. We see other people in Whale Song because we need a different perspective on looking at the DHC, looking at the Fringe, realizing that it's very easy to see the DHC as the evil empire from a different point of view, um,
Mhm.
and that not that nobody, no, it's not that nobody is good, the good guys. It's that the bad guys are integral to everybody. They're
Mhm.
just the usual suspects looking for money and power, and they aren't quote unquote New Texas, and they aren't like they're out there and they're doing bad things. But also to see the beginning of humanity's united PTX and DHC response to the aliens war out there, like shipbuilding and uh, terror, at what
Mhm.
is happening, and xenobiology and xenoarchaeology taking off as sciences as everybody goes like, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God, we need to know more about these people and stuff like that.
Mhm.
And then I'd like to do another series of short stories. I've already written a couple of them mostly to explore the xenoarchaeology angle as
Mhm.
Mhm.
humanity learns more about what might have happened in the past and like how to avoid it. And then the culmination would be the aliens war, where Enbaro is basically an admiral, and she's confronting the like fight or don't fight, like how the hell are we going to deal with this problem decision with her friends and allies. And that's a series, but like Alistair Reynolds, I can think of 8,000 other books to write in this. A really brilliant British writer I met at Glasgow, a
Mhm.
woman named Emma Burnett, who's written a bunch of short stories. And, anyway, she's a microbotanist. She's a botanist of some form, real life.
Mhm.
And she's like, I want to write, I want to see more about Sahel. I want more about like terraforming and whatever. I'm like, yeah, I wanted to do that too. I actually wanted to write a whole short story just about being a farmer in a like new atmosphere because I grew up with farms. But like I'm kind of tempted to engage Emma to help me with this because she actually thinks about these things as a scientist, and I'm like, yeah, because what I'm really interested in is sort of the whole universe. Anyway, I think I'm talking too much for you guys, but like I would love to write in this universe for a long time to come, and also chart some of the things we've been talking about, like how does the DHC respond when it's not putting hundreds of thousands of citizens into space? Does humanity
Mhm.
change when people aren't, to paraphrase Daryl, like standing on the hull and going like, space is awesome. Um,
And
does
and it's exciting to see because the if I'm not mistaken, Christian, Artifact Space, that was your first sci-fi book,
yes,
right? Got it.
yep.
So we like the passion comes through and it's super exciting to see this evolution in like balancing like, hey, there's all these cool fantasy things I'm doing and I am just super ready to dive into the sci-fi elements as well. So it's really exciting for us as readers to see
Mhm.
that passion come through, and it's great to see this series kind of expanding beyond the trilogy you were hoping for to being this whole, dare I say, universe. Right.
Yeah, I hope so because I mean, gentlemen, I'm 62. I figure I've got 8 to 10 more years of good writing left in me. I would like to do a sci-fi and a fantasy every year till I don't want to write anymore. Because I still have this sounds so self-serving, but I have so many stories I'd like to tell. Like somebody, I think it was Richard Swan, said at the con, he's like, we were in the bar, and I think it was Richard said, I don't understand people who say I have a good idea. He's like, I have a good idea every 5 minutes. And
Right.
I was like, exactly. That is, the having the good idea, not the problem. The time to write all the good ideas down. So my joke to him was like, that's what I have my phone for, because it used to be if I had a good idea, it would stick in my head. Whereas now it's
Mm.
like, I'll just be putting that into my notes.
right into the notes. Soon you'll have the neural link. We'll just upload your consciousness and you can write sci-fi books for eternity.
Well, I'll give you a clue about the future of Arcana Imperii. When I have a neural link, will I have the same experience of the wonder of space that one has with the same? I mean, this is not a new question in science fiction, but I intend to put it at the center of, like, is the Marca in Barrow who goes to try and deal with the aliens war at the end the same Marca in Barrow who stood on the hull and thought it was beautiful? That's right at the. See, I try to be a good writer. I want to talk about
I
human
think you
things.
succeed.
Well,
And it's
Have you?
a massive success with Deep Black, I think, Christian. So
It's
just
certainly
wanted
doing okay, and
to.
this is again going to sound self-serving, but when I read it, I didn't read it. I listened to Miss Nkoye, to the
she's
Audible
great.
book,
She's great.
because I was getting ready to write Whale Song and I needed to go through it again. And I'm
Mm.
like, this is not bad.
I'll take it. I'll take
Which
it.
is the ultimate compliment to oneself when reading one's own
yeah,
writing,
well,
from what
because
I've heard
sometimes
writers
it
say.
is. Sometimes it's very painful, and sometimes you go like, oh, I said that. That was so 2012. Like, I'm sorry. I'm sorry that I ever said that. And I mean, she makes my writing better. So does Peter Noble. Like, their performances, I go like, oh, that's better than what I wrote, because you added that
Right.
little thing. And there's this feedback loop I'm having with both Peter Noble and Ms. Nkoye, is like, I listen to them perform the character, and then I'm like, oh, you're right. That's better than what I thought. Okay, that's the character now. Like,
Right.
that
No,
definitely has
exactly.
happened with Morosini. The accent and
Mm.
stuff like that. I'm like, okay, now I'm I'm using that.
Thinking of them in that way. No, that's interesting. Yeah, the audiobooks I highly recommend as well. And I was listening to Beyond the Fringe and I was having a good time. You've got a couple different voice actors in there.
I think
So
Peter Noble is doing the more male or male gendered
mhm.
characters, and Anika Nkoye is doing the more female. Yeah,
Right, right. And then you've got Christian Cameron coming in with the setting up the scene for each one, which how could you turn
that
that
was
down?
really fun. I honestly, I want to do more short fiction. Um, yeah, and I'm gonna. It's, I'm telling you guys all my secrets, which maybe you enjoy and maybe you just find boring. But I'm gonna write some short fiction all the way back to the Red Knight universe.
Oh,
Um,
wow.
uh, I've had some very thoughtful inquiries. I actually love fan mail or reader mail, and sometimes people are like, so this is my favorite. Is like, so the whole Red Knight thing is very much an analog for the world. So like, hi, I live in China. I live in India. What's happening in India and China? And I actually always knew there was a gate in my allegory of India. So I'm like, I'd be happy to give you a heroic India. I love Indian history, and I know I mean, like a reasonable amount of Indian history. And I'm like, yeah, and I know the arms and armor there too. So, uh, so here comes Persia and India in the Red Knight world. I mean, it won't be, the standard characters. It won't be
Yeah.
Gabriel Murians, but it will be very much in the same. So I'm going to do some fantasy short stories. And anyway, I write fast. You guys know it.
Oh yeah, the volume, the breadth of work. So we have no doubts that you'll get to all of it. But in the meantime, guys, check out Artifact Space and Deep Black, and we have so much more to look forward to in the Arcana Imperii series. Um, I mean, Christian, thank you so much for your time and your
Yeah,
knowledge and
thank
giving
you.
us some of those exclusives. Yeah, thank you so
Oh,
much.
yeah.
Great. It's great hanging out with my friends. I love it when Daryl says that. And like when The Land comes out, I hope you guys will like it, and I hope you guys will have me on to talk about that. And
Absolutely.
the rest of Arcana and Perry.
That's right. We
However
got
many
Whale
books,
Song coming out. We got the Aliens War. We've got
however many
potential.
books Gillian Redfern and Claire Ormsby Potter give me.
You listening, guys? Come on. Christian's good for it. He'll write them, put them out. Come on. How could you deny the world? So,
Somebody made the
Christian.
joke at the Gallant's party while I was getting COVID, that I needed to have my own department because of my speed of production. Anyway, I wish I sold that well.
Well, it's greatly appreciated as a reader for sure to have that consistent delivery. So thank you for that, Christian. And hey, anytime, doors always open, of course. Guys, thank you so much for listening. Christian, again, thank you so much for coming on. Guys, check out Artifact Space, check out Deep Black, check out Beyond the Fringe and everything else. But search Christian Cameron, Miles Cameron, and check it all out. And thank you all so much for listening. And as always, go forth and conquer, friends.